I still remember the uneasy feeling that settled in my stomach the moment we pulled up to the old mansion. The place was enormous, towering over us like some kind of ancient beast waiting for its next meal. The windows were mostly shattered, the front doors barely hanging on their hinges, and the overgrown ivy crawled up the stone walls, almost as if it were trying to choke the life out of the house. This was where we were going to spend the night? My instinct screamed to turn back, but I couldn't show that to the others, especially not to Lisa. Lisa was the reason I was there. Really? She was always into this kind of stuff. Ghosts, haunted places, the thrill of the unknown. I, on the other hand, was a skeptic. At least, that's what I told myself. Deep down, though, there was something else, something I didn't like to think about. My younger brother, Sam, had died in a way no one could ever explain, and ever since, I carried this heavy guilt around, wondering if I had somehow caused it. But tonight wasn't about that. Tonight was supposed to be about facing our fears, or so Lisa kept saying. "Come on, Jake, don't be such a wuss," Lisa teased, giving me that playful smile I usually couldn't resist. I forced a grin, even though the pit in my stomach only grew deeper. The others were already unpacking the car, their excitement palpable. Marcus, our self-proclaimed leader for the night, was the first to grab his flashlight and head toward the entrance. "All right, let's get this party started," he shouted, his voice echoing off the walls of the mansion as if the house were mocking him. Sarah and Nick followed closely behind, both eager to see if the stories about this place were true. I lagged behind, my steps heavy with doubt. As we stepped inside, the air grew noticeably colder, and the musty smell of decay filled my nostrils. The interior was worse than the outside, dusty, dark, and filled with broken furniture that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. The floorboards creaked under our weight, and every step felt like it might be our last before the whole place came crashing down. Lisa, of course, was thrilled. "This is perfect," she exclaimed, pulling out her phone to start filming. "Just think of the stories we'll have after tonight." I forced a chuckle, but couldn't shake the sense of dread creeping over me. Something about this place felt wrong, like it was waiting for us. But I couldn't back out now, not with everyone looking to me to be the brave one, especially Lisa. I tried to push the thoughts of Sam to the back of my mind, but they clung to me like the dust in the air, impossible to shake off. The plan was simple: explore the mansion, try to capture any paranormal activity, and, if we were feeling particularly brave, use the spirit board Lisa had insisted on bringing. I wasn't a fan of the idea, but she had convinced the others, and now here we were, setting up in what must have once been the dining room, ready to summon whatever spirits still lingered here. I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. The house felt alive, in a way I couldn't quite describe. Every shadow seemed to shift, and the silence was almost deafening, broken only by our nervous chatter and the occasional creak of the house settling. As the sun set outside, the darkness inside the mansion became absolute, and the flickering light from our lanterns only seemed to make the shadows dance more ominously. We sat in a circle around the spirit board, our fingers resting lightly on the planchette. My heart pounded in my chest as Marcus began to ask the usual questions. "Is anyone here with us? Can you give us a sign?" And for the first time that night, I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. I told myself it was just nerves, but deep down, I knew better. Something was here with us, something we had no business messing with. And then, the planchette moved. The moment the planchette slid across the board, I felt my breath catch in my throat. It wasn't a subtle movement either. It jerked with a force that made everyone in the room freeze. For a second, we all just stared at each other, our eyes wide with disbelief. There was no way anyone could have faked that. Marcus looked around, his bravado suddenly gone, and Lisa's smile faded into something more uncertain. Did you guys see that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Her hand was shaking, but she kept it on the planchette, too scared to let go. "I saw it," I muttered, my voice barely above a whisper. My mind raced, trying to come up with a rational explanation, but nothing made sense. Maybe it was just the adrenaline, the way our nerves were all on edge, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. Marcus tried to regain control, his voice steady but strained. Okay, let's not freak out. It's probably just a draft or something. But even as he said it, he didn't sound convinced. He cleared his throat and asked another question, this time more carefully. If there's a spirit here with us, can you tell us your name? The planchette didn't move at first, and for a moment, I thought whatever had happened before was just a fluke. But then, slowly, it began to glide across the board again, spelling out a name that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. M, Marcus read aloud, his voice trailing off as he looked at me, confusion and concern etched on his face. I felt like the ground had just fallen out from under me. Sam, my brother's name. It was impossible. There was no way any of them could know. I had never talked about Sam with them, not even with Lisa. I kept that part of my life buried deep where it couldn't hurt me. But now it was right there, in front of everyone, staring me in the face. Jake. Lisa's voice broke through my thoughts, soft and worried. Isn't that your brother's name? I couldn't answer. My mouth was dry, and my heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I wanted to run, to get out of that house as fast as I could, but I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by a mix of fear and disbelief. The others were staring at me, waiting for an explanation, but what could I say? How could I explain this? Before I could even try to respond, the planchette moved again, faster this time, almost aggressively. It spelled out another word, one that sent a cold shiver down my spine. S-O-R-R-Y. Sorry. My blood ran cold. What the hell was happening? Was this some kind of sick joke? But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The apology was too personal, too real, echoing the guilt I'd carried with me for years. The room felt like it was closing in on me, the air thick and suffocating. I'm done with this, Nick suddenly said, his voice shaky. He pulled his hands away from the board, and the planchette stopped moving. He stood up, running a hand through his hair, his face pale. This isn't fun anymore. Let's just get out of here. I wanted to agree, to grab Lisa and leave before things got any worse, but I couldn't shake the feeling that leaving now would be a mistake. Something had been started here, and I wasn't sure it could be stopped so easily. And then, almost as if the house itself were answering Nick's demand, the temperature in the room dropped suddenly, so cold that I could see my breath hanging in the air. A loud crash echoed from somewhere deeper in the mansion, like a door slamming shut with a force that rattled the walls. We all jumped, turning toward the sound, but the darkness beyond our circle of light was impenetrable. The fear in the room was tangible now, everyone on edge, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. But we didn't run. None of us did. Instead, we just stood there, listening, our eyes wide and our breaths shallow. And then we heard it, a faint, distant whisper, too low to make out the words, but unmistakable in its presence. It was like someone was standing just out of sight, watching us, waiting. Lisa grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. Jake, what's going on? I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that whatever we had contacted wasn't my brother. It wasn't Sam. This thing, whatever it was playing with us, using my guilt, my pain, to get inside my head. And the worst part? I was starting to believe it was working. The atmosphere in the room was suffocating. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel Lisa's grip tightening on my arm, her fear radiating through her fingertips. The whispering grew louder, like a chorus of voices just out of reach, each one mingling with the next until it became an indecipherable murmur that filled the entire mansion. I tried to focus, to think of something, anything, that could explain what was happening, but the only thing that kept running through my mind was that name. Sam. I wanted to believe it was some kind of twisted coincidence, that maybe one of the others had somehow learned about my brother and was messing with me, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. None of them knew. Not about him, not about the accident, and certainly not about the guilt that had eaten away at me for years. The board had spelled out his name on its own, and I had no explanation for it. We need to get out of here, I said, my voice shaky, barely able to push the words out. This isn't right. But even as I said it, I knew it wouldn't be that easy. The front door felt a million miles away, and the mansion seemed to stretch out around us, the shadows deepening and thickening with every passing second. It was like the house had a mind of its own, and it wasn't going to let us leave. Marcus shook his head, trying to put on a brave face, but the fear in his eyes betrayed him. No, man, we can't just leave. We came here to face this, to see if there's anything real in this place. We can't just run at the first sign of something weird. Something weird? Nick snapped, his voice high-pitched and panicked. Did you miss the part where the board spelled out Jake's dead brother's name? This isn't a game anymore, Marcus. Sarah was on the verge of tears, her eyes darting around the room like she expected something to jump out at any moment. I don't want to be here anymore, she whispered, her voice cracking. I don't care about the stories or proving anything. I just want to go home. I could feel the tension in the group reaching a breaking point. We were all scared, and the mansion seemed to be feeding off that fear, amplifying it until it was all-consuming. The air was thick with it, and the walls seemed to close in around us, the temperature continuing to drop until it felt like we were standing in a freezer. Then, as if on cue, the whispering stopped. The sudden silence was almost as terrifying as the noise had been. We all stood there, frozen, waiting for something to happen. For a moment, it felt like time itself had stopped, and we were trapped in that awful, breathless quiet. And then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. At first, it was hard to make out, just a dark shape moving slowly toward us from the far side of the room. But as it came closer, the details became clearer. It was a man, or at least something that looked like a man. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes were nothing but empty black voids. But what terrified me the most was the way he moved, gliding across the floor as if his feet weren't even touching the ground. My blood turned to ice as I realized who, or what, I was looking at. It was Sam, or at least, it was something pretending to be him. Jake. The voice was a twisted mockery of what I remembered, a distorted echo of my brother's voice. Jake, why did you leave me? I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My mind was screaming at me to run, to get away, but my body refused to obey. All I could do was stand there, staring at the thing that wore my brother's face, the guilt and fear overwhelming every other thought. Lisa tugged at my arm, trying to pull me back, but it was like I was rooted to the spot. Jake, we have to go. We can't stay here. But I couldn't tear my eyes away. The figure was closer now, close enough that I could see the faint outline of what used to be a face, twisted into a grotesque imitation of the brother I'd lost. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished, dissolving into the shadows as if it had never been there at all. The room erupted into chaos. Marcus was shouting something, trying to rally everyone, but his words were lost in the panic. Sarah was crying, Nick was pacing frantically, and Lisa was desperately trying to drag me toward the door. But I was still frozen, my mind replaying that awful voice over and over. Jake, why did you leave me? The words echoed in my head, pulling me deeper into the guilt I'd carried for so long. I could feel the mansion closing in on me, the walls pressing tighter, the shadows growing darker, and I realized, with a sickening clarity, that whatever was in this house knew exactly what it was doing. It was using my guilt, my fear, to get inside my head, to break me down until I was nothing, and I was letting it. It felt like the mansion had swallowed us whole, trapping us in this twisted nightmare with no way out. The fear was so thick, so all-consuming, that it felt like I was drowning in it. My mind was racing, replaying the image of that thing, Sam, or whatever it was, over and over again. The more I thought about it, the more it dug its claws into my brain, refusing to let go. Lisa was still pulling at me, her voice urgent. Jake, please, we have to move. We have to get out of here. Her desperation snapped me out of my trance, and I finally forced myself to look away from where that figure had been. Yeah, I managed to choke out, my throat dry. Yeah, you're right. We need to go. But as I took a step toward the door, the whole house seemed to shudder. A low, rumbling sound echoed through the walls, and the floor beneath us trembled as if something deep below was stirring, waking up. The lights from our flashlights flickered, casting erratic shadows that danced wildly across the room. It was like the mansion itself was alive, reacting to our every move, trying to keep us here. Marcus ran to the door, grabbing the handle and yanking it hard, but it wouldn't budge. What the hell? It stuck. He pulled harder, but the door seemed fused to the frame, refusing to open. "Damn it!" he shouted, slamming his fist against the wood in frustration. Nick and Sarah joined him, trying to pry the door open, but it was no use. We were trapped. Panic was setting in fast, and it was clear we were losing control of the situation. The walls seemed to close in on us, the air growing colder with each passing second. It felt like the mansion was shrinking, pressing down on us, feeding off our fear. "We're not getting out this way," Marcus said, his voice laced with frustration and fear. "We need to find another way out." "There's no other way," Nick snapped, his voice edging on hysteria. "We're stuck in here. That thing is gonna kill us, man." "Shut up, Nick," Marcus shot back, trying to keep the group from unraveling. But it was clear that none of us were in our right minds anymore. The fear had taken hold, and it wasn't letting go. In the midst of the chaos, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. In the far corner of the room, half hidden in shadow, was a door. It was small, almost like a crawl space, and it didn't look like it had been opened in years. Dust and cobwebs covered it, but there was a faint light leaking out from the edges, flickering like a dying flame. I pointed it out to the others. "Look over there. Maybe we can get out through there." Marcus hesitated, but then nodded, his desperation outweighing his doubt. "It's worth a shot. Come on, let's check it out." We approached the door cautiously, every step echoing in the oppressive silence. The closer we got, the colder the air became, until it felt like we were standing in a freezer. My breath came out in visible puffs, and my fingers were starting to go numb. Whatever was on the other side of that door, I wasn't sure we wanted to find out, but we didn't have a choice. Marcus was the first to reach the door. He hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the handle, before finally gripping it and giving it a gentle push. The door creaked open slowly, the hinges groaning in protest. The light inside was dim and flickering, casting long, eerie shadows across the floor. We peered inside, and what we saw made my blood run cold. The room beyond was nothing like the rest of the mansion. It was small, almost claustrophobic, with walls covered in strange symbols and drawings that looked like they had been carved into the wood with something sharp. The air was thick with the smell of decay and something else, something metallic, like blood. But the most disturbing thing was the centerpiece of the room. An old, rotting wooden table with a large, blackened book lying open in the middle, surrounded by half-melted candles. "What the hell is this place?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. It looked like some kind of ritual room, a place where dark things had been done. The symbols on the walls seemed to pulse and writhe in the dim light, as if they were alive. The book in the center seemed to call out to us, drawing us in despite every instinct screaming at us to stay away. "We shouldn't be here," I said, my voice shaky. "This place, it's wrong. We need to get out of here now." But as we turned to leave, the door behind us slammed shut with a deafening bang, sealing us inside. We all jumped, our fears spiking into full-blown terror. The room seemed to hum with energy, the air growing thicker, more oppressive. The flickering light from the candles cast grotesque shadows across the walls, making the symbols seem to twist and contort even more. And then, from the shadows, a figure began to form. It was darker than the surrounding gloom, an inky blackness that seemed to absorb all light. As it took shape, I could feel a wave of malevolence wash over me, so intense that it made my knees buckle. The figure was tall, with limbs that were too long, too thin, and a face that was nothing more than a void, a blank, empty space where features should have been. It moved slowly toward us, its presence suffocating, filling the room with a palpable sense of dread. We were all frozen, paralyzed by the sheer terror of what was happening. This was no ordinary ghost, no lingering spirit from the mansion's past. This was something far worse, something ancient and evil, something that had been waiting for us. "Jake," it spoke, but not with a voice. The words were inside my head, echoing like a nightmare come to life. "You brought them here. You brought them to me." I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. I could feel the darkness closing in, wrapping around me, squeezing the air from my lungs. This thing, it knew me, knew my guilt, my fear. It had been waiting for me, using the mansion to draw us in, to feed on our terror. And now it had us exactly where it wanted us. The room felt like it was spinning, the walls closing in, pressing down on us with a weight that was almost unbearable. My mind was racing, trying to process what was happening, but it was like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. That thing, whatever it was, stood before us, its void-like face fixed on me. I could feel its presence inside my head, probing, digging into memories I tried so hard to forget. "Jake," it whispered again, though its lips, or where its lips should have been, never moved. The voice was in my mind, echoing through the darkest corners of my thoughts. "You brought them here. You brought them to me." "No," I whispered back, my voice trembling. "No, this isn't my fault." But even as I said it, I could feel the doubt creeping in. It had been my idea to go along with this, to come to the mansion. If I just said no, if I'd insisted we do anything else, we wouldn't be here, trapped with this thing. The others wouldn't be in danger because of me. I felt Lisa's hand tighten around mine, her fingers cold and shaking. "Jake, what is that? What does it want?" I don't know," I stammered, but the truth was I did know. I could feel it. This thing was feeding off my guilt, my fear. It had been drawing us in, manipulating us from the start, and now it was going to finish what it started. The air in the room grew thicker, the shadows darker, as if the walls themselves were bleeding black. I could hear the others, Marcus, Nick, Sarah, whispering, panicked, but their voices seemed distant, like they were coming from far away. All I could focus on was that figure, standing in the middle of the room, growing taller, its limbs stretching and twisting as if it was trying to engulf us all. "You can't run," it said, its voice dripping with malice. "There's no escape, Jake. Not for you, not for any of them." A cold sweat broke out on my forehead, my heart hammering in my chest. I had to do something, anything, to get us out of here, but I didn't know how. I felt powerless, like a child lost in the dark. The fear was overwhelming, but underneath it all, there was something else, anger. Anger at this thing for using my brother's memory, for exploiting my guilt, for turning me against the people I cared about. "No," I said again, louder this time, forcing myself to stand up straighter, to meet its gaze, or where its gaze would have been. "You're not him. You're not Sam." The figure paused, and for a moment, the room seemed to still, the oppressive weight lifting just slightly. But then it laughed, a sound that wasn't really a laugh at all, more like a chorus of voices all laughing at once, reverberating through my skull. "You think you know the truth, but you've always been blind," it hissed. "You've lived your life in fear, Jake, running from the past, hiding from the guilt. But now, it's time to face it." The shadows in the room began to writhe, slithering along the walls, reaching out toward us like dark tendrils. I could feel them brushing against my skin, cold and clammy, like the fingers of the dead. The others were shouting now, backing away, but there was nowhere to go. The room was alive, pulsating with the malevolent energy of whatever this thing was, and it wasn't going to let us leave. "Stop," I shouted, more out of desperation than anything else. But the shadows didn't stop. They coiled around my legs, pulling me down, dragging me toward the center of the room, toward that thing that still stood there, watching, waiting. I struggled, trying to break free, but it was like fighting quicksand. The more I fought, the tighter the shadows gripped me, pulling me closer to that endless void. I could feel the others trying to pull me back, their hands grabbing at mine, but it was no use. The darkness was too strong, too hungry. And then, just as I was about to give in, I heard Lisa's voice, clear and strong, cutting through the chaos. "Jake, you have to fight it. Don't let it win." Her words snapped something inside me, a spark of defiance flaring up in the darkness. I wasn't going to let this thing take me. I wasn't going to let it take any of us. I forced myself to focus, to push past the fear and the guilt. To find that part of me that was still strong, still willing to fight. I don't know where the strength came from, but I grabbed onto it with everything I had. I planted my feet, digging my heels into the floor, and pulled against the shadows with all my might. For a moment, it felt like they were going to tear me apart, but then, slowly, I felt them begin to loosen, the cold grip weakening just enough for me to take a step back. "Let go of me," I roared, pulling harder, my voice echoing off the walls. "You don't control me." The figure in the center of the room seemed to flicker, the darkness around it wavering. I could feel its anger, its frustration, but I didn't care. I took another step back, then another, until I was free of the shadow's grasp. The others were still holding on to me, their faces pale and terrified, but there was a glimmer of hope in their eyes. "Jake, we need to get out of here now," Marcus shouted, and I nodded, finally feeling the adrenaline kick in. We turned and ran, stumbling over each other in our rush to get out of the room. The door was still sealed, but I wasn't going to let that stop us. I slammed into it with my shoulder, feeling the wood crack under the force, and with one final push, it gave way, the door flying open. We spilled out into the hallway, the darkness chasing after us like a living thing. But we didn't stop. We ran, faster than I'd ever run in my life. The mansion twisting and shifting around us as if trying to trap us within its walls. But I wasn't going to let it. Not now, not ever. We burst through the front doors, the cold night air hitting us like a slap in the face. The mansion groaned behind us, the shadows reaching out one last time. But we didn't look back. We just kept running, across the lawn, past the rusted gate, until we were far enough away that the house was just a dark silhouette against the sky. Finally, we collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath, the fear still clinging to us like a second skin. But we were alive. We had made it out. But even as I lay there, my heart still pounding in my chest, I knew it wasn't over. The guilt was still there, buried deep inside me, and that thing, whatever it wasn't done with me. Not yet. The cold night air stung my lungs as I lay there on the grass, trying to catch my breath. My whole body was trembling, not just from the adrenaline, but from the sheer terror of what we had just escaped. The others were scattered around me, equally shaken, their faces pale and drawn. For a moment, none of us spoke, the only sound our ragged breathing and the distant rustle of leaves in the wind. I couldn't believe we were out. It didn't feel real, like we were still trapped in that nightmare, and any second now, the darkness would reach out and drag us back inside. I forced myself to sit up, to look around, to convince myself that we were really, truly outside the mansion's grasp. The house loomed in the distance, dark and silent, as if it were just another abandoned building and not the twisted, malevolent thing we had encountered inside. But I knew better. I could still feel it watching us, waiting, like it was just biding its time before it made its next move. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. Lisa was the first to break the silence. Is everyone okay?" Her voice was shaky, and I could see she was still in shock, just like the rest of us. "Yeah," I muttered, though I wasn't sure if that was true. Physically, we were all here, but mentally, I wasn't so sure. We had all seen things in that house, things that would haunt us for a long time. And for me, the haunting had already started. Marcus sat up beside me, rubbing his temples like he was trying to push the memory of the last few hours out of his mind. "What the hell was that?" he asked, his voice a mix of fear and anger. "What did we mess with in there?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that whatever it was, it had gotten inside my head, and it wasn't going to leave anytime soon. I could still hear its voice, that twisted mockery of Sam's voice, echoing in my mind. "You brought them here. You brought them to me." "I don't know," I finally said, my voice hollow, "but we shouldn't have gone in there. We should have left when we had the chance." Nick was pacing back and forth, his hands shaking uncontrollably. "This isn't happening," he kept muttering under his breath. "This can't be real." "It's real," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. She was sitting with her knees drawn up to her chest, staring blankly at the ground. "It's real, and we were so stupid to go in there." I could feel the guilt rising inside me again, that same heavy, suffocating guilt that had been with me ever since Sam died. I knew they were right. We never should have gone in there. But now it was too late. We had opened a door that should have stayed closed, and I couldn't help but feel like it was all my fault. "Jake," Lisa said softly, touching my arm. "What happened in there? You seemed different, like you knew something we didn't." I looked at her, seeing the concern in her eyes, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. How could I explain that the thing we had encountered had used my brother's memory, had twisted it into something dark and vile to get inside my head? How could I tell her that part of me had believed, even if just for a moment, that it really was Sam? "I don't know," I lied, shaking my head. "It was just everything in that house was wrong. It messed with our minds. I don't think we should talk about it anymore. We just need to get as far away from here as possible." The others nodded in agreement, too drained to argue. We needed to leave, to put as much distance between ourselves and that place as we could. But even as we started to gather our things, to head back to the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, that whatever we had encountered in there wasn't done with us yet. As we drove away from the mansion, the silence in the car was thick, almost unbearable. No one said a word. We were all lost in our own thoughts, each of us trying to process what had happened, to make sense of the impossible. But deep down, I knew there was no making sense of it. Some things were just too dark, too twisted, to ever be understood. I stared out the window, watching the mansion disappear into the distance, swallowed up by the night. But even as it faded from view, I could still feel its presence, like a shadow lurking in the back of my mind. And I knew, with a sickening certainty, that it wasn't going to stay there. It was only a matter of time before it found us again, before it found me again. Because this wasn't just about the mansion or the spirits that haunted it. This was about me, about the guilt I'd carried for so long, the guilt that had made me an easy target. The mansion had used it, had fed on it, and I knew it would keep feeding until there was nothing left of me. We drove in silence for what felt like hours, the road stretching out endlessly before us. I could feel the others' unease, their fear still clinging to them like a second skin. But there was nothing I could say to reassure them, nothing I could do to make them feel safe again. Because the truth was, we weren't safe. Not anymore. As we finally reached the edge of town, I closed my eyes, trying to block out the memories, the voices, the guilt. But it was no use. They were all still there, lurking in the corners of my mind, waiting for the moment when they would come crashing back in. And when that moment came, I knew I wouldn't be able to stop it. I had brought us into the darkness, and now there was no way out. The mansion had left its mark on us, and it was only a matter of time before it claimed what it wanted. I just didn't know how long we had left.